The empath identity is often built on being needed. From an early age, they learn, sometimes subtly, sometimes through pain, that their value is tied to how well they can respond to the emotions of others. They become hyper aware of tone shifts, facial expressions, silence, and tension. While others move through life focused on their own impulses, the empath scans the emotional atmosphere, adjusting themselves to maintain harmony. Over time, this ability stops feeling like a skill and starts feeling like a responsibility. Being needed becomes proof of worth. If someone is upset, the empath feels summoned. If someone is lost, they feel called to guide. If someone is broken, they feel obligated to mend. Their nervous system becomes wired to respond to distress as if there were a personal assignment. They don't just notice suffering, they internalize it, and in that internalize it, and in that because I matter because I help. It hides beneath kindness and generosity. It disguises itself as compassion. But underneath the softness is a fragile structure of identity. The empath often struggles with a haunting question: who am I if I am not needed? In relationships, this dynamic becomes even more pronounced. The empath may unconsciously gravitate toward those who are wounded, unavailable, or chaotic, not because they enjoy pain, but because chaos gives them a role. Defension provides purpose. If someone is stable and self sufficient, the empath can feel strangely irrelevant. Mutual wholeness feels unfamiliar. They are more comfortable where there is something to fix, soothe, or carry. This creates a paradox. The empath longs for deep, balanced connection, yet their identity pushes them toward imbalance. They overgive, they overextend, they anticipate needs before they are spoken, they solve problems that were never handed to them, and in doing so, they slowly erase themselves. Their own needs become blurry. When asked what they want, they hesitate. When offered help, they deflect. They deflect. Receiving feels unnatural because their identity has been constructed around providing. To need something themselves can feel like weakness, even guilt inducing. They are far more comfortable being the strong one, the stable one, the emotional anchor. But beneath that strength is exhaustion because being needed all the time is heavy. It creates invisible pressure. The empath may feel responsible for other people's moods, decisions, and healing. If someone they love is struggling, they carry it as a personal failure. If a relationship falters, they search themselves for what they could have done better. Their empathy turns inward as self-criticism. This is where resentment quietly begins to grow. Not loud resentment, not explosive anger, but a slow internal depletion. They start to notice that while they are always available, not everyone shows up for them. While they are deeply attuned to others' emotions, few people ask about theirs. The imbalance becomes harder to ignore. Yet stepping back feels terrifying because if they stop overfunctioning, who are they? They. When the empath begins to question this identity, they encounter a kind of psychological void. Without the constant role of caretaker, they may feel lost. There is discomfort in silence. There is anxiety in not fixing. There is guilt in saying no. Their sense of self has been so intertwined with usefulness that detachment can feel like disappearance, but this discomfort is revealing. It exposes how much of their identity was constructed around external validation. Being needed brought appreciation, relevance. It protected them from abandonment by making them indispensable. If others relied on them, they would not be left behind. At least that was the hope. Over time, however, the empath begins to see that being indispensable does not guarantee being loved. It often guarantees being used. And there is a profound difference between the two. As this realization deepens, the empath starts to feel the tension between compassion and self preservation. They begin noticing when they say yes out of fear instead of desire. They recognize when they are offering support to avoid confronting their own emptiness. They see how often they trade authenticity for approval. And in that awareness, something begins to shift within their identity. Overextension is often praised in the empath. It looks like generosity. It sounds like devotion. It feels like purr. The empath says yes when others hesitate. They stay when others walk away. They give when their own reserves are empty. From the outside, it appears noble. From the inside, it slowly fractures the psyche. At first, overextension feels empowering. The empath becomes the reliable one, the strong one, the emotionally intelligent one. They anticipate needs before they are spoken. They absorb tension before they interrupt. They smooth conflict before it escalates. Their identity strengthens around this role. And with every sacrifice, they reinforce the belief that love must be earned through endurance. But the human psyche has limits. When giving becomes constant and reciprocity remains absent, something buried begins to stir. The empath may not notice it. They are too focused on managing everyone else's emotional landscape. Yet beneath the surface, exhaustion accumulates. Resentment gathers in quiet layers. Anger, long suppressed in the name of kindness, begins to press against the walls of consciousness. This is the beginning of shadow awakening. Bio, the shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of the self that has been rejected, denied, or deemed unacceptable. For the empath, the shadow often contains anger, selfishness, boundaries, envy, and the desire to withdraw. These traits conflict with the identity of the endlessly patient caregiver, so they are pushed down, ignored, rationalized away. Overextension forces them back up. When the empath gives beyond their capacity, they experience betrayal, not just from others, but from themselves. They say yes when they mean no. They tolerate disrespect to preserve peace. They forgive without accountability. Each time they override their own limits, the shadow grows stronger. Eventually, it demands attention. It might first appear as irritation over small things, a sharper tone, a shorter response, a sudden need for isolation. The empath may feel confused by this shift. Why am I becoming so? Reactivity is often repressed. Truth surfacing. The shadow carries messages the conscious identity refuses to hear. It says, you are tired. It says, this is unfair. It says, you are tired. For someone who has built their self image around selflessness, these messages feel dangerous. Anger feels wrong. The desire to withdraw feels cruel. The impulse to prioritize oneself feels selfish. So the empath may try to suppress the shadow again, doubling down on giving, hoping to restore the former harmony. But once awakened, the shadow does not return quietly to sleep. Overextension eventually creates a breaking point. The empath may find themselves emotionally numb where they were once overvowing. They may fantasize about disappearing from everyone's demands. They may feel sudden waves of rage that seem disproportionate to the situation. These experiences are not signs of becoming heartless, they are signs of integration attempting to occur. The shadow does not want to destroy the empath's compassion. It wants balance. It wants the empath to recognize that boundaries are not betrayals, that anger can be protective, that saying no is not abandonment. Overextension has forced the psyche to confront what has been denied. The empath is not an endless resource. In this stage, relationships often shift dramatically. People who benefited from the empath's over-functioning may react negatively to new limits. The empath may be accused of changing, becoming distant, or not caring like they used to. This external pressure can intensify internal conflict. The empath stands at a crossroads between returning to familiar self-sacrifice or embracing the discomfort of authenticity. Shadow awakening feels destabilizing because it challenges the foundation of identity. The empath must confront uncomfortable truths that they have participated in their own depletion, that they have enabled imbalance, that they have feared rejection more than they valued self-respect. Yet within this confrontation lies power. When the empath allows themselves to feel anger without shame, they reclaim energy. When they acknowledge resentment without self-judgment, they gain clarity. When they recognize their desire for reciprocity, they step toward equality instead of martyrdom. Overextension was the catalyst. It stretched them beyond illusion. It exposed the cost of endless giving. It illuminated the parts of the self that demanded recognition. The shadow emerges not to harden the heart, but to protect it. Withdrawal is often misunderstood. When the empath begins to pull back, observers are quick to label it as bitterness, resentment, or emotional wholeness. They assume something has hardened. They believe kindness has colded into indifference. But what looks like bitterness from the outside is often integration unfolding on the inside. For years, The empath may have the outwardly focused on others' needs, others' feelings, others' growth. Their energy flowed away from them constantly. Uh, uh, their energy flowed invasion, parts of the self were neglected. In this outward neglected, personal desires were postponed, boundaries were softened, anger was swallowed. The inner world became secondary to maintaining external harmony. Withdrawal interrupts that pattern. It is not an act of punishment, it is a turning inward. The empath begins reclaiming the energy that was habitually dispersed. Instead of rushing to soothe every discomfort in the room, they pause. Instead of offering solutions before being asked, they listen in silence. Instead of filling every gap with reassurance, they allow space to exist. But the distance is not always detachment. Sometimes it is differentiation. The empath begins to separate what belongs to them from what does not. They stop absorbing emotions automatically. They notice when a feeling in their body is not theirs to carry. This awareness creates a natural boundary, and that boundary can look like withdrawal to those who preferred unlimited access, and integration requires this separation. The empaths must meet parts of themselves that were previously suppressed. They must sit with their own loneliness instead of escaping into someone else's crisis. They must confront their own unmet needs rather than distracting themselves with service. This inward focus can be uncomfortable. It exposes dependency patterns. It reveals how often connection was maintained through self sacrifice rather than mutuality. In the early stage, withdrawal can feel unfamiliar, even frightening. The empath may worry they are becoming selfish. They may question their compassion. The internal voice that once praised endless giving may now accuse them of betrayal. But this tension is evidence of restructuring. The psyche is reorganizing itself around balance rather than excess. Bitterness seeks revenge. Integration seeks wholeness. When someone withdraws out of bitterness, they carry hostility. They close their heart defensively. They withdraw to punish or to prove a point. But when the empath withdraws as part of integration, the quality is different. It is quieter. It is steadier. There is less emotional charge and more clarity. The empath is not trying to hurt anyone. They are trying to stop hurting themselves. This shift often changes relational dynamics. Conversations become more honest, agreements become clearer. The empath may no longer tolerate subtle disrespect or chronic imbalance. They speak less, but when they do, their words are direct. They no longer feel compelled to manage how others react to their truth. This composure can be mistaken for indifference. In reality, it is self trust forming integration means accepting the full spectrum of the self-compassion and anger, generosity and limits, openness and discernment. The empath no longer identifies solely with being nurturing. They allow themselves complexity. They understand that that does not require constant accessibility. Care does not demand constant presence. Withdrawal also creates space for reflection. Without the noise of external demands, the empath can hear their own thoughts more clearly. They can identify patterns they previously ignored. They can recognize where they overfunctioned to avoid abandonment. They can see how that identity became entangled with being indispensable. Ah, this clarity strengthens them instead of freer. Sting reflexively to every emotional stimulus. They respond intentionally. Instead of merging with others' pain, they witness it. Instead of fearing disconnection, they accept that some relationships were sustained by imbalance and may not survive equality. Integration is not dramatic. It does not announce itself loudly. It unfolds through subtle choices, declining an invitation without guilt, allowing someone to solve their own problem, choosing rest over rescue, speaking a boundary without apology. Each of these moments redefines the empath's relationship with themselves. The world may interpret their quieter presence as withdrawal, but internally, something expansive is happening. Energy that was once scattered begins consolidating. Emotional clarity replaces chronic overwhelm. Relations that remain grow more authentic because they are no longer built on unconscious sacrifice. The empath who integrates does not lose their capacity for care. They refine it. They choose when and where to offer themselves. They recognize that true connection thrives on reciprocity, not dependency. Their compassion becomes grounded rather than compulsive. What appears as distance is often self-reclamation in progress. Individuation is the process of becoming a distinct, integrated self rather than a reflection of expectations, roles, or unconscious patterns, roles, or unconscious patterns. It is the movement from living reactively to living consciously for the empath. This journey is inseparable from the development of emotional boundaries. The empath remains fused with the emotional currents around them, unable to distinguish where others end and they begin. In the absence of emotional boundaries, identity becomes tension and desires as if they were their own. If someone close to them is anxious, they feel anxious. If someone is disappointed, they feel responsible. Their sense of stability fluctuates with the emotional weather of the room. This fusion creates the illusion of connection, but it erodes autonomy. Individuation demands separation. Separation does not mean detachment from humanity. It means clarity of ownership. It means recognizing that empathy does not require absorption. The empath must learn to witness emotions without inheriting them. This shift can feel unnatural at first. The nervous system, long conditioned to merge, resists the boundary. It equates distance with rejection, autonomy with abandonment. Yet without boundaries, growth stalls when every decision is filtered through how others will feel. Off, off, then decision is compromised. The empath may silence opinions to avoid conflict. They may alter preferences to maintain harmony. They may suppress ambition if it threatens relational stability. Over time, they lose contact with their own internal compass. Their life becomes an adaptation rather than an expression. Restore that compass, big emotional boundaries, restore that compass. A boundary is not a wall, it is a definition. It clarifies what is mine to carry and what is not. It distinguishes compassion from responsibility. When the empath begins setting boundaries, they are not rejecting others, they are reclaiming themselves. They begin to say no without elaborate explanations. They allow others to experience the consequences of their choices. They resist the impulse to rescue when rescue is not requested. This stage often triggers this stage often triggers discomfort in relationships. People who benefited from the empath over availability may feel threatened. They may interpret boundaries as withdrawal of love. They may accuse the empath of changing or becoming distant. These reactions test the strength of emerging individuation. The empath must tolerate misunderstanding without collapsing back into self sacrifice. Individuation requires this endurance. To become whole, the empath must withstand the anxiety that arises when they are no longer managing everyone's emotions. They must face the fear that their setting limits could lead to disapproval or loss. These fears are deeply rooted, often tied to early experiences where love felt conditional upon compliance or usefulness. Boundaries challenge those old agreements. They say, I am allowed to exist without constant accommodation. They say, I can care without collapsing. They say, my peace is not selfish. As boundaries solidify, the empath experiences a shift in internal structure. Emotional reactions become clearer. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by diffuse tension, they can identify specific feelings. Instead of being swept into others' narratives, they remain grounded in their own perspective. This grounding strengthens decision making. Choices are no longer driven solely by the desire to avoid discomfort, but by alignment with inner values. Values. Individuation also involves confronting guilt. For the empath, guilt often accompanies self prioritization. Even reasonable limits can trigger self doubt. The mind may question whether kindness is being replaced by coldness. A true kindness does not require self erasure. Emotional boundaries allow kindness to be sustainable rather than compulsive. With boundaries, relationships evolve. Some connections dissolve because they were built on imbalance. Others deepen because they are finally reciprocal. Conversations become more honest. Expectations become explicit. The empath is no longer silently overfunctioning. Instead, they participate as an equal, capable of giving and receiving without distortion. This equality is essential for individuation. This equality is without emotional boundaries. The empath remains entangled in collective emotion, unable to differentiate their authentic self from relational roles. With bounder, they step into sovereignty. They become capable of solitude without panic, connection without fusion, compassion without depletion. Individuation is not the abandonment of empathy, it is its maturation. It transforms empathy from an unconscious reflex into a conscious choice. It anchors sensitivity within structure. It replaces martyrdom with self respect. Then, who embraces emotional boundaries does not lose connection to others, they gain connection to themselves. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, as if stepping back means ceasing to care. But in the evolution of the empath, detachment is not the death of love. It is the purification of it. It is the moment when love is no longer tangled with fear, control, guilt, or the need to be needed. It is the final test of whether compassion can exist without possession. For much of their life, the empath may equate love with closeness, involvement, and emotional immersion. To love someone means to feel with them, for them, sometimes even instead of them. Their nervous system synchronizes with others. If someone they love is in pain, they carry that pain as their own. If someone is lost, they feel compelled to guide them. This merging feels intimate, even sacred. But merging is not the same as loving consciously. When love is fused with responsibility for happiness, it becomes heavy. The empath may try to fix, persuade, rescue, or away. They may believe that if they detach, something will fall apart. Underneath this belief is fear, the fear of being irrelevant, of being abandoned, of watching someone suffer without intervening. Detachment confronts that fear. It asks the empath to love without controlling outcomes. It demands trust in another person's journey. It requires the courage to witness struggle without immediately stepping in. This is not passivity, it is restraint born of wisdom. It is the recognition that growth cannot be forced and that interference can sometimes delay the very lessons someone needs to learn. Unconscious love respects autonomy. It understands that each individual carries their own path, their own shadows, their own responsibilities. The empath's role is not to engineer transformation. Detachment allows space for others to encounter themselves fully. It says, I care, but I will not carry what is not mine. This shift is deeply uncomfortable at first. The empath may feel restless when they are not solving a problem. They may feel anxious watching someone make mistakes. The urge to intervene can feel almost instinctual. But detachment strengthens the inner structure. It builds tolerance for uncertainty. It dissolves the illusion that love requires constant action. In detachment, the empath discovers a different quality of presence. Instead of absorbing, they witness. Instead of over explaining, they listen. Instead of rushing to soothe, they hold space. There is depth without entanglement. There is warmth without self sacrifice. The emotional intensity that once defined their relationship softens into steadiness. This is the final test because it challenges the deepest attachment, the attachment to being indispensable. To love consciously means accepting that someone can struggle without you fixing it. It means allowing others to choose paths you would not choose for them. It means understanding that your value is not measured by how much you are needed, but by how authentically you show up. Attachment also reveals hidden motives. It exposes when care was mixed with the need for validation. It uncovers where help was offered to secure closeness. It brings awareness to subtle control disguised as support. Facing these truths requires humility. The empath must admit that not all give was purely selfless. Sometimes it was intertwined with fear of losing connection, or it is no longer driven by anxiety. It is not fueled by urgency. It is steady and deliberate. The empath can say, I love you, without silently adding, and therefore I must save you. They can remain open hearted while allowing distance. They can walk away from unhealthy dynamics without hatred. Detachment does not mean the absence of feels deeply. They still feels deeply. They still care, but their emotions are no longer reactive to every fluctuation in another state. They are grounded within themselves. This grounding creates freedom for both parties. In this stage, relationships shift from dependency to choice. The empath chooses to stay, not because they are uh, required, but because they are desire connection. They choose to give, not because they feel obligated, but because it aligns with their values. Love becomes voluntary rather than compulsive. Detachment is the moment love proves its maturity. It is where compassion stands without chains. It is where care exists without control.